talking about Polisinese. There's Riserva, there's single vineyards, there's Gran Selezione, you know, it's just lots of different. That's true. Oops. Yeah, got it like that. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, we have a couple of figures she gets.
Great. We're back.
So Massimo is the Italian portfolio specialist for imports. So he is as knowledgeable as categories as possible. So I challenge you to try stuff into that.
Oh, great. Thanks, White.
We realized we could do this, and I emailed all the distributors and said, okay, so who you got? And we kept this button about 30 minutes after we decided to start the first tasting. No, I mean, this our representation with wine, but we had an effect for the season. So thank you.
Thanks, White. Absolutely. Really happy to be here. We're back. This is really special for me. The last time I was in the market, it was in Minnesota. The first time back is in Minnesota. And, you know, I'm half excited about doing this tonight, and I'm equally as excited to spend time away from my wife, because 500 days in a row is like a lot for anybody, right? We've never spent that much time together, and we've known each other since we were 8. So go figure that, right? I grew up in an Italian household. My parents immigrated from Italy just a couple of years before I was born, from Modena in Emilia-Romagna. That's where Lambrusco comes from, Parmigiano Reggiano, prosciutto, more known for its foodstuffs than its wine. But we always had wine on the table growing up. That's kind of how I fell in love with it. Unfortunately, it was always 3-liter jugs of Carlo Rossi Chablis. My dad still drinks that wine to this day out of the 3-liter jug. And every Sunday night, I bring him a bottle of fine white wine. And he always says the same thing. He goes, Massimo, the wine is very good. The bottle's really small. He just doesn't get it. That thing disappears so quickly, right? But Italian wine is a huge subject. There's, you know, so much to talk about, even with just Tuscany. You know, we could go on and on about Tuscany, a little bit, or a lot of history, I guess, to kind of set the stage for this tasting tonight. That you should know, one of the really cool things, when we go back like 3 million years, all of Tuscany was essentially underwater, right? There has been 3 million year old, maybe it's 300 million, I might be misspeaking, whatever the Eocene epoch was. There's been fossilized shark teeth found in the vineyards of Castello di Bossi, and that's the winery we're tasting tonight. There was an entire whale skeleton unearthed further south in Montalcino. That's something that's now 1,300 feet above sea level. They dug out an entire whale skeleton. So really cool. The soils in Tuscany, because of this, are really complex. It wasn't just that it was underwater once, but the sea returned and retreated a bunch of times. So it brought in different minerals. There's a lot of limestone throughout Tuscany, which really helps wine become elegant and focused, especially in Chianti Classico and Montalcino. Fast forward to like 500 BC, and the main people in Tuscany are the Etruscans. So this is pre-Roman. The Etruscans were a native civilization to Tuscany who really took wine to a different level, right? So the grape got there because of the Greeks and the Phoenicians that brought it over. Slowly it spread its way up the peninsula The Etruscans were the first to think about training grapevines to poles instead of to trees, which was the old method. They would just tie it to whatever was naturally around. And they were the first to really concentrate on vinification techniques in the cellar, to really, think about hygiene and think about the way wine was being made for specific grapes, right? The Romans.
Let me interrupt you just a second. I encourage everybody to have a taste of the Chianti Classico Terroir. His presentation will be a lot more interesting if you're actually tasting the wine.
I totally agree. Because yeah, right.
We've had things where we talk for an hour before we tasted the first wine, and that's not all that much fun.
That's very true.
This is actually yours. Okay, good.
So, yes, please enjoy a little bit of the first Chianti. So we're talking about the Etruscans. After them came the Romans. They took wine even more seriously. This is when wine from single parcels of land began to be prized more than others. So now you're starting to think about like the first single vineyard. Hey, wine from this hill is really good, right? So the Romans took it to that level. They named a god after wine, of course. And wherever they went, so did the church. So thank God, because the church was like super important to wine surviving the Dark Ages. The church was the only entity that was still producing wine, right? And after that, after the Romans fell, Italy becomes fractioned into these different city-states. So there's like the Republic of Venice, who's super powerful. They're like a merchant republic. In Tuscany, it's divided in two. There's the Republic of Florence in the north, and then the Republic of Siena in the south, two distinct separate states. And it's around 1500 that Siena, or rather Florence, conquers Siena. And Tuscany becomes unified as the Grand Duchy of Tuscany under the Medici family. Cool? Everyone's still with me? Shortly after that, 1716, let's say, Chianti becomes one of the oldest delimited wine zones in the entire world. It was the Medici family who said, in order to call wine Chianti, it's got to come from this place. And the recipe wasn't quite there yet, but it's got to come from this place, which is super cool. And that's where I'll refer you to the map that I provided in this fold out for tonight. The spot in the center, number 1, which is red, I think, I'm colorblind. But the spot in the center, number 1, is what we now call Chianti Classico. Back then, that's all there was, so it was just called Chianti. Like a lot of zones in Italian wine, including Soave, including Valpolicella, demand got so big that they had to increase the size of the denomination, right? So now everything outside of those original borders is referred to as Chianti, or one of these Chianti kind of subzones, but you can only call it Classico if it comes from the original hilliest part of the denomination. It's got the highest elevations, the poorest soils, which is really good for wine. So there's a lot of what they call galestro and albarese, which is has a bunch of limestone, again, in it, kind of a friable rock. And furthermore, Classico is divided into communes. So you can think of Chianti Classico as like a county and all of these communes as cities, right? So on the right here, you see Chianti Classico, all these different communes. There's one called Castellina, one called Greve, one called Panzano. The furthest south of all these communes is Castelnuovo Berardenga, which is where Castello di Bossi is located. So,
why is poor soil good?
Yeah, so poor soil, the roots have to dig deeper, and in doing so, pick up a lot of minerality, right? Sometimes a lot of that topsoil, or what do they call that? The humus of the soil, I think, can be really fertile, right? But as you get down, it's often poorer. They'll find a lot of those minerals in the soil, right? And those root systems will really have to dig and work deep, essentially bringing all of that intricacy of what's happening in the soil up into the grapes. So we're in the southern part of Chianti Classico. Wines from this area said to be a little bit bigger, a little bit rounder, a little bit more like Montalcino. If any of you guys know that denomination, like Brunello di Montalcino, the wines from Castelnuovo Berendenga are often called Brunellese, or like kind of like Brunello, right? Why? Because we're further south. Sangiovese, which is the main grape in Chianti, is notoriously a late ripener, and so it enjoys that extra heat that it gets in Castelnuovo Berendenga and in Montalcino to fully ripen, right? Before the climate got warmer in general, it was really difficult to get really ripe Sangiovese in Chianti or further south in Montalcino, of course. So I think this is a good point to check out the first wine as I tell you a little bit about Castello di Bossi as well. It's got a really great history. It's a very strategic property with a castle, so Castello translating to castle, from the 9th century. So it's got a really long storied history. The winemaking history goes back before the current owners. But it was really just kind of a bulk production winery until the Bacci family acquired it in the 1980s. And their history was they were denim makers. Florence is a big fashion hub, and Milan, of course, more so, but Florence as well. And Bacci was making all these cool denim designs, very Italian, very sleek. And then he was getting ripped off by people copying, right? Fakes, basically. And they were flooding into the market. And one day he says, that's it. I'm going to do something that nobody can copy because nobody can make grapes from my land and turn them into wine. Of course, please. So that was kind of the beginnings of the winery. It's got a really interesting history before that. There's a couple of vineyards, which include the last two wines that we're going to be tasting tonight, that were always considered incredibly noble. And the previous owners always sold the grapes from those vineyards to another producer. When Castello di Bossi took ownership, they started producing wine from those vineyards. And those are the last two wines that we'll be tasting tonight. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Castello di Bossi mostly does Sangiovese. 95% of their vineyards are Sangiovese. It's a gigantic winery. In total, the land is 700 hectares. So a hectare is like the size of 2 football fields put next to each other. The land is 700 hectares. Only 125 of them are growing grapes, which is really typical of Chianti Classico in general. There's a lot of woodlands, you know, only about 10% of the total land area in Chianti Classico is under vine. So really great biodiversity there, right? They specialize in Sangiovese. As I mentioned, certainly Chianti Classico is their bread and butter. They produce 3 levels of that and some great single vineyard wines as well. A wonderful focus on sustainability. They have the largest solar farm in Chianti Classico. 80 hectares is a solar farm, so like 160 football fields. They provide 80% of the electricity for the township of Castelnuovo Berendenga, which is pretty phenomenal. Yeah, very, very green attitude. And then winemaking is very traditional, long, slow fermentations, and very minimal intervention. They say they like to touch the wines very few times between the vineyards and the cellar. That being said, they're one of my favorite, most respected wineries because they produced 0 wine in 2014. 0. It was a tough vintage in Tuscany. They farm organically, and 125 hectares is a lot of area to cover doing that, because after you get heavy rains, which 2014 was full of, you have to get out in the vineyards and treat them with sulfur. So natural treatment, allowed in organic farming, but it prevents any kind of mold or fungus after that kind of rain. It just wasn't sustainable because they got these heavy rains day after day after day. And at the end of the day, they said, we're not going to put our name on that vintage. To think about that, you know, to think about losing all that money is incredible. But intelligently, they always hold their wines back a year. So if everyone else is releasing their 2018 Chianti Classicos, Castello di Bossi is releasing their 2017 Chianti Classico. In case something like this happens, there'll never be an interruption in the market. You know, they want their customers to be able to access their wines. So the first wine is Chianti Classico Riserva. We skipped the entry level for you guys, right? White said, no, my customers need better than just Chianti Classico.
David would throw a wine glass at me if I poured it. You know, it's important to remember the commitment that organic winemaking represents. It's a lot of work and a lot of respect, without even mentioning the cost of registering yourself as, you know, and paying to be certified.
Exactly right.
We had one of these conversations with Marco Bacci, the great Pomeranian producer, and he talked about, you know, he changed in 2010, and everybody was so excited, you know, everybody, the workers, everybody, except the spotlight father thought he lost his mind. But until they realized that they were going to have to go out at midnight to pick the caterpillars off the vines one by one, because you couldn't spray them and kill them anymore. And the caterpillars eat the buds, and you're not going to have any grapes if you don't remove them from the vines.
Sure.
And so they're going out at midnight, from midnight to 2 every night with flashlights, picking one caterpillar at a time off the vine. And his quite as excited about the organic concept that
no kidding.
Hard work with the vendor. It is hard work. It is
Truly
expensive. But also
nice. Interesting.
I have a question.
Please.
For you. So,
Awesome. Yeah. Spectacular. Absolutely.
Can you, very different vintage.
Very much so.
2015,
Yep.
maybe a little more tight and focused.
Yeah.
Can you contrast?
Yeah, certainly. So when we just talked about this as far as Montalcino goes as well. So both vintages are considered spectacular in terms of Tuscany. 2015, 2016 are both 5-star vintages in Montalcino. Wines from Chianti Classico to Super Tuscans to things in Bulgari have all received incredible critical acclaim from both vintages. Most producers talk about the fact that 2015 was like super easy sailing in terms of Mother Nature. Everything was just perfect. Rain fell at the right times. There was enough snow left at the end of the winter to create water reserves. There was a good amount of sunshine, which Sangiovese loves. It loves the illumination and the sunshine, and good temperature variation between day and night. So it was just really easy. They didn't really have to do very much. 2016 was a little bit more challenging throughout Tuscany. The spring was colder, so frost was a concern in the vineyards, as it was this year. If any of you guys are like on Instagram or Facebook, you might have seen all throughout Europe this spring, there were people lighting fires in their vineyards to try to prevent, you know, frost damage to the early bud break. That was the case in 2016, so it started cold. There was a lot of rain in the beginning, which you don't necessarily want. There was not as much sunshine. So it started out really, really rocky. And then in August, September, everything turns completely around. There's just gorgeous, perfect weather day after day after day. Even bigger temperature swings between day and night. So you're talking about some vineyards during the daytime in 2016, like Castello di Bossi, reaching 100 degrees, and then cooling down at night to like the lower 60s, sometimes the upper 50s. like when you have elevation, right, you get these big temperature swings, and that creates aromatics in the wine. Certainly happens at the higher elevations even more. Swings might not have been that drastic at Castello di Bossi, but they still had really good. And then at harvest, yes, oh please, at harvest the weather was perfect. So you really want to get the most rain in Tuscany happens towards the end of October, or getting into the November time. So you really have to time your harvest before those rains. You don't want all that water, to waterlog the grapes, add additional water content into the grapes. So it was just great weather around harvest. They didn't have to worry about that at all. So it was harder, but it ended up great.
So is it?
Yeah, I would say Monica Larner from Wine Advocate likes to say that 2015s are flashy and 2016s are classy, right? So maybe a little bit more ripeness in the 15s. Yeah.
If you like Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you like Arnold, 2016 is a
Okay.
Well said.
better.
So back to the Berardo, this is Chianti Classico Riserva. You can see the different aging requirements if you like on that Chianti sheet that I handed to you. It shows you the difference between Chianti and Chianti Classico. And then you'll see the aging requirements, right? So 1 year for Classico, for Riserva, it's 2 years. And for Gran Selezione, which is the next wine that we're going to taste, it's 30 months. So longer aging kind of softens those tannins out a little bit. Berardo is a single vineyard. So that is the name of this wine. Also kind of referred to in Italian as a nome di fantasia to some extent, right? Berardo doesn't officially mean anything, except for the fact that Castello di Bossi, again, is located in Castelnuovo Berendenga, and Berardo is a way of saying it comes from Castelnuovo Berendenga. Almost like you would say Chicago, right? And Berardo means it comes from our town. They actually pay a fine of 50 cents a bottle for every bottle they produce because they want to put where they're located on it. Totally against Chianti Classico rules. They want it to, it's not broken up in the subzones like Barolo or Barbaresco. And so you're not supposed to say which commune, your winery is located in. They want people to know. Felsina does the same thing in Berendenga, so they put it on there. They don't care. 50 cents, great. It's worth it. This is a really great value this evening. It is $24.99. Usually retails for $29.99. Yes. And you're the recipients of that price break, because in the last year we saw on-premise consumption of wine drop to nothing. And this wine was one of those wines that we had placed at a ton of restaurants by the glass, right? So that all went away. Now we've got the 17s coming into the market. So it's a really stunning opportunity to, own a wine that's a reasonable price point that you can cellar easily this wine for 15 to 20 years, and it'll hold up fantastically. Bossi's got bottles of, when we were there, 1988 Chianti Classico, and this was in 2018. They were, they had changed for sure, less acidity, but still really drinkable and enjoyable. So there's 20% new oak on this wine. If any of you guys care about, wood treatment, new oak gives you those baking spices, that vanilla thing, caramelized kind of taste. There's only 20% new oak here, and they use a really light toast. So they want a little bit of that flavor, but not obviously over the top, overwhelming. All right, so one of the things that's really important to note is that Sangiovese, anytime you get a Chianti Classico or a Brunello di Montalcino, which has to be 100% Sangiovese, you should never be getting a wine that's like super dark or inky, because then it's not Sangiovese. It simply doesn't have those anthocyanins in its skins to produce wine of dark color. It just can't be done. The pigments that it does have in the skin are very, very light, And so it should always be kind of this ruby color. It should never be cloudy. Sangiovese should always be really bright, luminous, kind of like that weather it enjoys. And then the aromatic, like terpenes that it has in it, are really floral, indicative of violet. And also herbs is something that you can get from Sangiovese quite often. It's got kind of an herbaceous quality about it. Certainly cherry-esque. The origins of the grape are still unknown, which is shocking in today's world, right? There's different theories that grape A times a grape called the Ciliegiolo. Ciliegia means cherry in Italian, created Sangiovese. So Ciliegiolo being the parent. And then there's other studies that say Ciliegiolo is the offspring of Sangiovese. So the science isn't settled as far as where it came from, but certainly native to Italy, as far as most people think. I think there's a nice harmonious quality here. Everything's in really great balance, right? The acid, the tannins, the fruit. You know, please, please, please always eat with it. Tonight's an exception. But, you know, it's meant for the table. Italian wines often have a little bit higher acidity to them because an Italian really never thinks about drinking wine and not eating food. You know, they don't consider it a cocktail. It's never drunk around the fire, even if it's a big, ambitious wine, right? I break that rule all the time. But, you know, it's just, they go together in Italy. One of the things they often pair with Chianti Classico is wild boar, because the boars are like super destructive in the vineyards. So they'll just hunt them and then put them on the table for dinner. So it's a natural pairing. And, you know, Italians will never say that someone's had too much to drink. They'll just say, oh, look at that guy. He didn't have enough to eat today. You know? So food is always a central part. So the next one in the lineup is a new category in Chianti Classico. Like we needed any more confusion, right? So there's 9 Chiantis, there's Chianti Classico, so there's Riserva. This is a new category called Gran Selezione, or Grand Selection, right? It's a really interesting category. Only certain people can play. The rules are that the fruit has to come from your vineyards. There's a lot of wineries, and this doesn't mean that they're bad wineries. There's a lot of wineries in Chianti Classico who buy their fruit from other people. You know, you don't have to grow your own grapes. You can be a Chianti Classico producer and purchase all your grapes from someone else. You don't even need a vineyard. You just have to be a winery, right? Yes.
You mentioned that in 2014 they produced a wine.
Castello di Bossi, right?
Did they turn around and sell all those grapes to somebody else?
Correct.
Sort of thing?
Yes. Those grapes went into like bulk wine production. Exactly. Just everyday jug wines and things like that. Certainly wasn't wasted completely. Yeah. A lot of fruit.
It's a wild boar.
Absolutely. They love eating the grapes for sure.
There's right.
Yes.
Because
Big
of
time.
the pandemic, less people.
Hunting,
the
yeah.
wild boars, overrun,
Right.
and they try to call the herds.
Nice. Yeah.
So they're destructive.
They are very, very. Oh, good. There's a little food.
Marco,
Love it.
also told the story about his father and his village in growing his entire business, and he told him to buy everything he made. I don't care how much. It's about all the first minute. And he said, that's just not good enough. I'm not going to really. My second.
Sure enough.
Sold off some time of alcohol.
Vinegar. How about that? The things you do for love.
It's so vintage, you know, like,
Right? So back to Gran Selezione. The idea is that all the grapes have to come from your estate, right? That's number one. You can't buy any fruit. And the kind of strange thing that some of the producers think about it is that the estate doesn't need to be contiguous, right? So you can have, and a lot of producers do, just to balance out their wines, one, vineyard up in the north side of Chianti Classico, one in the south, one in the middle. And you can still do that and call it Gran Selezione, which some producers don't like, but it is what it is. What does it mean? It's an extra 0.5% of alcohol. It is an extra 6 months of aging, and all the fruit has to come from the estate. It's exactly what the name implies. So Gran Selezione means grand selection. And what Castello di Bossi and a lot of other producers do is they'll go through their vineyards and harvest Gran Selezione first. So they're looking for the best plots, the best bunches in those plots, things of that nature, significantly less Gran Selezione produced than the other wines. Most of the ones that you see in the market hover around $50. 40 is a really great price point from a fantastic producer. And about time we taste it. So the wood as opposed to smaller barrels or barrique, they use 500 bigger milliliter barrels. So these are called tonneau, and same thing with just a really light toast on them, and about 20% of them new. So this should, for every producer, represent the very best of the vintage, the best of their vineyards. I'm interested to, because we all taste differently, right? It's proven science that some people are super tasters, have more taste buds than other people do. We all perceive sugar, right, at different levels. So nothing's wrong in the world of wine, right? It's how you taste and what wine is saying to you. But I'm interested to hear from you guys how you see these two wines as being different, or since they're both 100% Sangiovese, do you view them as being more similar than different? Okay, great. Which would make sense, probably the ripest grapes.
Yeah. I was gonna say, riper, bigger.
More tannin.
Yeah.
Bigger mouthfeel.
Certainly built, I think, to go a little further.
Yeah.
Right? And I agree with your point, Hoyt. I think some of the primary fruit is kind of in the back here, where in the Berardo, I got more fruit up front. I think this is kind of a little bit more restrained of a wine, at least right now, right?
Yeah.
And full disclosure. Yes, they are. Correct. Yeah, which is kind of an anomaly in Chianti Classico, where Sangiovese has always been thought of as a blending grape. As a matter of fact, Canaiolo Nero used to be more important than Sangiovese in Chianti when they first created the zone. So making 100% Sangiovese isn't something most producers will do in Chianti Classico. And today you can add some international grapes as well. You can add up to 10% Sangiovese or Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah. Oh, cool. Nice.
When I first started in the wine business, almost all Chianti said 10%, 10%.
That's right, the white grape.
The white grape that didn't even make good. And it was and the wines are mostly just awful.
Truly.
You know, the change in average quality in Chianti over the last 40 years. Well, in Italian wine in general is extraordinary.
That's a great book title, from jug wine, or from, you know, the fiasco, from wicker baskets to Gran Selezione.
From fiasco to super Tuscan.
Right.
So today, what is the most common blending grape?
Sorry?
What is the most common blending grape?
Well, now, most Chiantis have Castello, Castello, and Colorino. Colorino obviously gives it color. Usually makes it a little darker in color. I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
No, just as the name implies, you're right.
The dark color is not something you really look for in Tuscan wine. If you did, you'd have to disappoint most of the time.
Right.
You know, for me, in blind tasting, which I do a lot of, Sangiovese always jumps out because it is this bright cherry red color usually that really, maybe some Pinot Noir, maybe some Gamay is that color, but not many grapes are that color. And then it has this menthol, this loose cherry cough drop kind of nose almost always that couldn't be anything else.
Right.
So it's if there's Chianti or Sangiovese in a blind tasting, the guy that organized the blind tasting will do well. But it's a easy.
Love it. Long, extremely. Yeah, at least. I think the best vintages of Brunello, which is also 100% Sangiovese, can go even longer than that. There were examples of 1888 and 91 Brunellos being tasted in 1994 and still holding up.
Yeah.
To think about that, almost 100 years later. So I think, yeah, I would not be scared of 20, 25 years on this wine at all. And it'll improve, right? It's a little tight right now. Full disclosure, we popped these bottles right before you guys got here. And that's my fault. You can blame me, not White, because of traffic. No, so it's the Twin Cities' fault. It's not mine. But, they'll certainly continue to open up and evolve as they are exposed to more oxygen. Not long, 2014 was the first year. Yeah. The Gran Selezione? Oh, cool. Great. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Was there another question? I'm sorry. Yeah. So, when you're making wine, the sugar in the grapes is measured by something called Brix. It's the amount of sugar in the grape. So riper grapes translate, or more Brix, more sugar, translate into higher potential alcohol. So the idea is to have that minimum threshold by which most producers exceed that, right? So the minimum, it's not on here, but the minimum alcohol, for Gran Selezione is 13. The Castello di Bossi that we're tasting tonight is, drum roll, 14 and a half. So the idea is to ensure that if you're going to call something Gran Selezione, there's a minimum ripeness there. There's a minimum,
Really an issue.
True.
There's no problem getting enough alcohol in the United States because
Right.
the world's a warmer place and the grapes are ripe. And fermentation is sugar and creating alcohol. So the more sugar there is in the grapes when you pick them, the more alcohol is going to be in the finished product. If the finished product is dry.
That's dry, right.
Yeah. We talked to a Beaujolais producer who, when he started 30 years ago, his wines were 9 to 11% alcohol. His 2020 vintage is 15% alcohol. It identifies a dry.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
he doesn't want to make sweet Beaujolais, so it's going to be 50% alcohol on that. So that's a 7% increase in 30 years, which nature is.
Do that math in your head?
Sir?
Did you just do that math in your head?
I mean, that's an enormous change, well, you know, in wine terms, 30 years is a great time. So it's just the nature of things.
Right.
I've heard that there's conversation towards identifying the communes.
Absolutely. Producers want that.
Yeah.
They want to obviously say where they're from. You know, this is what, and it's like anything else, right? It's cool to say, hey, my, apples come from this area of Washington, right? We should be talking about food like that more. Certainly wine people love to talk about that. In Barolo, sometimes it's the size of a vineyard, this size of this room, that people say, hey, it comes from here, from this spot. So that's really important to wine people. They're fighting hard for it. Yeah. I think the challenge is that the final end consumer, there's so much already to think about when it comes to Chianti. Here's just another thing now to say it's going to come, from a company. So, but I guess we should give people more credit, right? Like,
What's the resistance?
I think the resistance is coming from some large producers who source grapes from all over the denomination, who would really lose out on that identity thing, right? Right, right. So for the next two wines, we're gonna dive into the subject of Super Tuscan, which is kind of a funny term. It's got no official designation. Super Tuscan isn't a denomination, right? There's no rules to say this is what makes a Super Tuscan. People have described the Super Tuscan as 100% Sangiovese wine, as 100% Cab. Sometimes it's a mix of international varieties and Sangiovese. It's not really an official designation, but it's something that took Tuscany by storm in the late 1970s when a producer named Sassicaia started making wine in Bolgheri. Certainly took the critics by storm. The effect of planting international grapes in Tuscany proved to yield excellent results if they were planted in the right place. And soon afterwards, many others followed, both in Bolgheri and then also in Chianti Classico. They're saying, look at all the success they're having with these Cabernet and Merlot blends. Why can't we do that too? So we're talking about, again, the first plantings happened in the 60s. The first wines, started coming out in the 70s. A vine needs to be, 7, 8 years old, something like that, to start producing decent fruit. So.
Started in the 50s.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't realize they were that old.
Consumption. I think the first commercial vintage was 81.
Okay.
Told us that. But they really, pioneered the idea. Well, beyond something.
Sure. Right.
But Nico, he just said, I'm going to make wines that are equal of any wines in the world. And if I am bound by government regulations that I can only use Sangiovese, I can't make wines that are the equal of any in the world, because some of the places Sangiovese shouldn't be planted. I shouldn't be planting
Absolutely right.
Merlot or Syrah. And so I'm going to create this new category because I want to make wines that are the equal of Bordeaux or the Napa Valley, et cetera.
Right.
And he created this 100% Cabernet that the 85 was the greatest wine anybody ever tasted in their lives.
Still.
Giacomo Bianzani.
Oh, well, no kidding. And to this day, Sassicaia was the number one, top one of 100 wines from Wine Spectator just a couple of years ago. Yeah. So
there's always that bell count, there's in Napa.
Yeah.
There's here. There's Angelo Gotti in Piedmont. There's Nico and Chisador and there's Penfolds in Australia. There's always that that leader who's, you know, it's a consistent thread. And all it seems to happen in the 60s.
Interesting.
It's interesting that it's coincidental.
Sure.
Gaia's first vintage is 61. Robert Downey's first vintage is 66.
Huh.
And, you know,
So
there's
that's
a
the
lot
guys
of,
right there. Yeah.
a lot of creativity going on in the mind of the world in the early 60s.
Fascinating. So this is when all this Cabernet and Merlot starts to get planted in Tuscany. People start taking interest in this. The real super Tuscan explosion happened in the early 80s, but so we're here in the late 60s and people are starting to think about planting these two grapes. And one of the leaders in this whole movement is a guy named Giacomo Takis, and he plants two really cool vineyards of Cabernet and one of Merlot in what are today Castello di Bossi's vineyards. So interestingly, the previous owners who really just focused on bulk wine production sold those two vineyards, the juice that came from those Cabernet and Merlot vines, to a really prominent winery named Antinori. And Antinori took that juice and blended it into two of their top wines called Tignanello and Solaya. When the Bacci family acquired Castello di Bossi, they took back, well, they always owned the vineyard, they took back producing wine from those vineyards, right? So that first Cabernet vineyard that was planted is called Corbaia. The next wine in your glass. Aya, you've heard Sassicaia, Ornellaia, Solaya, very common with these super Tuscan wines, right? It's usually the part of the house that gets the most sunlight. And so same with those vineyards, right? They get the most sunlight, and that suffix, Aya, is added to it. So that's the name of the vineyard. 70% Sangiovese here and 30% Cabernet Sauvignon. The way they make it is really cool because Castello di Bossi produces a rosato from the same exact wine. So, right, they crush the grapes. The grapes are sitting with the juice, the skins, right? And it's changing the color of the wine. Most grapes, when you crush them, you're talking about white juice. I think it's 1 or 2% of grapes in the world that crush and produce red juice. So the color comes from sitting in contact, the juice, with the skins, right? Long, slow macerations, often around 30 days. In this particular case, when the wine gets to the rosé color that they want, they bleed off like 5 to 7% of this juice. And that's their rosato. So they market that as Castello di Bossi Rosato, comes from the same Corbaia vineyard. It's the same juice, just taken off its skins when it's a rosé. That ends up concentrating this wine, right? Because you have less juice now, less liquid, but the same amount of skins, right? So all of those polyphenols, all of those aromatic precursors, all of the color, the tannin, there's so much that comes from the skins of wine, including acidity, is in contact with less juice. And so it's giving that less juice all of that stuff, right? This particular one does see new oak. Again, it's a light toast, but this is 100% new oak. So different style. I think you'll taste the oak a bit more. And what else can we say about Corbaia?
Well, it's Solaya for $50. So Solaya sells for $300. It's sure an amazing deal.
Right?
At least that's what you just said, right?
Yeah. And the truth of the matter that's really cool too is that this is it's more like a $70 wine. In the business, we have something called IR or inventory reduction. When we have new vintages, and because of the pandemic, this is very much the case, when we have new vintages arriving into the States or the producers want to sell them, but we're still sitting on old vintage, we discount them, right? The easiest way to get them out the door. What I love about what Hoyt did for you guys is he's not like looking to make extra money and charge 70 for this wine, but rather pass along those savings to you, which is really cool.
I'll be around so you can all pick me up back.
How long did it take you to rehearse that?
No, not at all. It's a cool thing though, you know, because a lot of people will just make that extra money. Like, why not?
So when they make a line, 70%, 30%.
Yep.
So always the rates are.
That's an awesome question. That's a really great question. I think that's the exception to the rule. Very often they're vinified separately because very often different grapes will ripen at different times. So it's very possible that the Cabernet is harvested 3 weeks before the Sangiovese, and you couldn't possibly, you know, let the grapes sit around and wait.
Generally, winemakers feel very, very strongly about what they do in answer to that question.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, pick the grapes, identify everything together. Some people, you know, source grapes, crush the grapes, ferment them separately. So, you know, if there's 100 variations on the thing. Some people put some use in concrete and some use in used oak and some use in new oak. And there's a producer in Friuli in Roslyn, who he found some Roman and chloride in the ground in his vineyards. So however old that is, I'm not sure, thousands of years ago. He dug them up, cleaned them up, and he puts his wine in those Roman and chloride. He buries, conceals them and buries them in the ground.
Good wine.
In the vineyard where the grapes were. And lets them age in clay, you know, and chloride stick doesn't. In the ground where the grapes are, and he thinks that's kind of the ultimate expression of terroir.
If they're aging in the earth.
In a clay vessel, that it was in the ground it was in for however many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
How cool.
Yeah, and his wines are amazing. I mean, they're amazing wines. They are also amazingly expensive. Amazing wines.
So hopefully you enjoyed the Corbaya. Really speaks to me. I think it's a nice harmonious blend when you put these two grapes together. They just play off each other, right? Cab's got that color. It's got more tannin. It's got more structure. And Sangiovese kind of lifts the whole thing with those bright flavors and acidity.
You know, this wine's 8 years old and it's still pretty young.
Truly.
So, again, you're talking about a basically a 20-year wine. You know, cool wine, so. But if you know, if we opened it 2 hours before we poured it instead of 5 minutes before we poured it, it would experience right now would be different. It would be more voluptuous, richer.
Agreed.
The aroma would be more complex and profound. You know, kind of what you would expect with 5 more years of bottle age would be what it would taste like if we opened it a couple hours ago, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Very much so.
You know, one of the things you know, with all these stations we've been doing the last year, you know, I open 5 or 6 bottles of wine a week. My girlfriend does great. So I have all this wine on the counter at home. And sometimes it's a week before I get to a bottle of wine. And sometimes the wine is really, really amazing when it's been sitting open on my kitchen counter for a week. I mean,
That's incredible.
It is really not old. You know.
Sure. With a top tier.
I put the cork back in the village Chablis, not because we had a ground crew for cheap, premier crew in a village Chablis. I didn't want to have the ground crew go south on me, so I drank it first. It was fabulous. I didn't want to have the premier crew go south on me, so I drank it second. It was fabulous. I finally got to the village, you know, the $30 with the village Chablis. Like 3.5 weeks later, I had the cork back in, it was in my refrigerator. I took it out an hour before it poured the glass. It was absolutely sensational.
Oh, wow.
3.5 weeks.
Just racing acidity.
Just
Yeah.
incredible. Much
Wow.
better than it was the night, the morning I tasted it.
Oh, cool.
You know, everything in fact worked out. I opened a bottle of German Riesling once in my store in Nashville for a customer that I thought would really like it. It's amazing wine. Dry Riesling from the book. And he did it, he bought a bunch of it, and I didn't even put the pork back in it, I put it in the refrigerator, in the walk-in.
Yeah.
And forgot about it, and about 6 months later, I noticed it, and poured myself a glass, and it was back there.
Nice.
And it was not even with the pork in it. But Riesling, high acid, high minerality Riesling.
Sure.
Really called, beer fruit. It was absolutely.
Oh, wow. My father swears that Carlo Rossi lasts a month once opened. I believe him. It is a Chablis, just like you were mentioning, right? So that's a.
Marty Rosen told us in our conversation with him, Rosen told us that he discovered, he didn't know this, but he discovered this. Wouldn't get 20, 30 years before bottle. And so he tried it. And so he's now making wine, he's bottling wines, starting now, that have been Riesling, that's been aged in foeders, the 1,000-liter vessels, old vessels, for 20, 30 years before he bottled.
Wow.
You like them? I've never tasted it.
I'd say.
Who would have thought we'd be talking about Chablis and Riesling?
That's right. No, that's good. That's good. Everything's related, right? Hopefully none of you said if they're pouring any effing Merlot, I'm going home tonight, like they did in Sideways, because we've got a Merlot for you. I think great Merlot happens in very few places in the world, right? Merlot is one of those grapes where you can plant a lot of places. It'll do well just about anywhere. There's a ton of Merlot grown in the Central Valley of California where there's no temperature change between day and night. It's always hot. They produce Merlots. But it really shows greatness in a few select places on Earth. I think Tuscany is very much one of those places. Some of the most collected wines in the world are 100% Merlot from Tuscany. So you're talking about things like Massetto. You're talking about Re di Gaffi from Tuorita. La Perita is another one. I think that's Castello di Ama, if I'm not mistaken. But those are all 100% Merlots. So highly regarded by the wine world, right? That they're among the most collected in the entire world. Wines that can stand up to blind tastings with things like Chateau Petrus, that belong on that same table. Castello di Bossi produces this Girolamo from this noble vineyard, again, that ended up in that Tignanello and Solaya before they started making wine. But what I think is really incredible about this, right, is that you're talking about vines that are like 50 years old, that have always produced this really concentrated, incredibly expressive Merlot, and compared it to those wines, like it doesn't cost anything, right? Massetto is, I don't even know how much money now.
$800.
Okay, thank you.
If you'd like to buy something, we have.
Jeez, Re di Gaffi sells for like $350, something like that, right? I think this wine can stand on the table with those wines. It's really, really well crafted. Again, planted kind of by the godfather of super Tuscans, this guy named Giacomo Takis, and really, really just noble. Merlot from Tuscany really expresses itself as Italian in the sense that there's this big, bright, beautiful acidity, right, that balances the fruit. Because Merlot is quite a fruity grape, I think, on the palate. Have you guys gotten a chance to taste this yet? One of my favorite things is putting a wine, Hoyt talked about blind tasting, putting a great Merlot in people's glasses is really a fun thing to do, because they just don't think they like Merlot, or they'll say they don't like Merlot, but taste a wine like this.
Merlot's kind of a redheaded stepchild of the wine world. Because, I think largely because there's only a dozen or so wines that are really, really great, that are 100% Merlot. There's Petrus, which is $4,000 a bottle.
Oh, my Lord.
There's Lacan, that's $2,000 a bottle. You know, and then there's Leonardo LoCascio and Washington State, which is amazing, but that's pretty, it's about $100 for Washington State Merlot, who's paying that. The Secco's $800 a bottle. I mean, Leonardo is Merlot is such a great wine. I once traded Randy Dunn from Dunn Vineyards in Napa, one of the greatest winemakers in the world, a bottle of Leonardo Merlot for a bottle of 1982 Chateau, which is a $10,000 bottle of wine. But he had never tasted Leonardo Merlot and he wanted to. So he tried that. I said, you can have any, I will trade you any bottle of wine in my wine cellar for that bottle of wine. It was in the backseat of my car. And I said, well, just pick something you'd like to drink. And we'll drink them together. And so we drank a bottle of 82 before and a bottle of Leonardo Merlot. That's how great that wine is, how highly regarded it is among really, people, geeks like me. But then there's Duck on Three Palms, which is really great. But there's not that wine that you can hang your hat on that most people have ever tasted like there is today. Wow. I think that's fair.
Absolutely. Very much so.
I mean, it's unfair.
Right.
I think it's a rough accurate statement.
So included in the packets I made for you guys tonight, you can see a claim if you like that sort of thing. These wines got really great vintages or really great ratings from the press in general. But press is an interesting thing, right? And just to prove that we all taste differently, you can go on Winebow's website. There's a little button at the top that says a claim, right? And you can select Castello di Bossi, you can select Gran Selezione, you can select 2016, and read these 3 different reviews from Suckling, Wine Advocate, and Wine Enthusiast, and they're all wildly different.
Yeah.
They're all big scores, but their descriptors of the wine often tend to, be so different. One person's saying this, the other's saying that, as far as things that they're pulling out of the wine. So I think that could be evolution as well. When was the wine tasted, right? One guy tasted it 6 months after it's released. The other guy, sometimes 2 years after it's released. So how has the wine evolved?
70% of what you taste is what you smell. A lot of tasting wine comes down to what you smelled in your life. So if you've never smelled lavender, you're not going to pick up lavender in a red Bordeaux.
Good point.
I mean, the first time I'd always assumed red Bordeaux smelled like lavender because I was taught that, but I never had smelled lavender in my life. And then one day I happened on some lavender and I was like, wow, this smells like red Bordeaux. And, for the first time, you make a connection. So much of what you smell is in your nose.
Right.
And if you've never smelled.
For people who grow up in Nebraska, what do you think are smelling?
That's why you think Chardonnay smells like corn. The thing about Merlot is we point to a bad opinion of Merlot because most Merlot in California is planted in the wrong place. And there are those wines like Forest Glen and all those wines that were all the rage before the movie Sideways came out, which destroyed Merlot. But Merlot was mostly planted in places that shouldn't have been planted. So the wines were pretty awful. Most of California Merlots were, in fact, pretty awful. And
Then Rusco's in the 70s were not great either.
well, yeah, we didn't see the numbers.
That's the ones that were playing out.
But then when Phylloxera came along in the 80s and killed all the vineyards in California, everything was Citadel and the Taro, they had an opportunity to replant everything and they could plant Chardonnay would do well, and Pinot Noir would do well, which is not much of California really. And then Merlot, where Merlot would do well, Cabernet where it would do well, et cetera. And it really, again, the average quality of California wine is really changed dramatically as a result of all kinds of kills. And so Kendall Jackson say to the wine.
Native to already lost the access to have in the they just walk down the street.
They've got plenty of vineyards. They didn't need this. They've got plenty of good, but I mean, the Antinoris are one of the most noble families, you know, in Italian wine. When you talk about Tuscany in general. But yeah, they're fine. Don't worry about it. I hope this evening was enjoyable for you guys and good. It's a fun thing, you know. I think the whole difference between Chianti Classico, all these different levels are now something you guys can all speak to with a lot of confidence when, you know, people start that conversation. But it's always a pleasure presenting these wines. All of the wines in our portfolio are, you know, family owned. And it's a pleasure, obviously, to translate their passion to consumers such as you guys. So thanks for spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
No, I wouldn't say very much. Every 5 years or so, something like that. A ton. Actually, it's weird. My dad's whole side of the family stayed in Italy. My mom's whole side of the family came to the United States. Yeah.
Any thought about making a Syrah?
I don't think so. He said last time I talked to Marco Bacci, he said that they have some new projects started, but he wasn't willing to talk about them until they proved fruitful. Pardon?